Hi everyone, I just wanted to do a video really just to go over some of my processing techniques and my current workflow in processing. I did a video similar to this a few years back, but I thought it was worth doing a new one because a few things in Lightroom have changed, so hopefully a few of the new features will be shown in this video and it'll just give you an idea of how to use them. Because I appreciate previous videos you may have watched don't go over some of those things. So yeah, I've got a selection of images for you, which I'll show you how I process. This first image that's on screen now will be the main one, which will take a little, we'll go through most of the steps on that, and then we'll have a quick look at the other ones as well, just to show you how I'd go about editing them. Just first off, I'll just apologise if there's any audio issues. I'm just recording this while I've got a spare minute on my laptop. So I'm just using the built-in mic, but hopefully you can hear me all right with that. What I want to do with this video, I'll go over all the features and try and explain each feature in Lightroom, but without going into too much depth that the video just goes on forever basically. And it's also just good, this video is good if you've been on one of my workshops where we've had the chance to take a look at processing on my laptop while we're out and about as well. That's meant to be just a quick introduction to post-processing, and hopefully this gives you a refresher as well. So yeah, we'll start off with this image, which is taken from the Krang on the Isle of Skye. This was in October 2022. We had a great morning on the Krang. It was one of those rare mornings where you actually saw me get my camera out on the workshop, just because the conditions were that good, so it was worth taking that time once everyone was set up to get an image myself as well. I took this image as a HDR file, so I bracketed the images. So we've got basically a shot with well, we've got 3 shots in total. One that was underexposed by 3 stops, one overexposed by 3 stops, and then the normal exposure. The HDR file, I'm not going to show you how to put that together. Just have a look through my email if you've had that off me before with all the processing videos. There's a link separately how to put a HDR file together. But this is that resulting HDR file. You can see down here it says hdr.dng. So that basically that is the final file. Now it still looks overexposed, that's fine. What we've got to do when you get a HDR file, you've got to then pull that detail back. It's just basically the file has got the dynamic range behind it, and you can take back the detail that you want, which is one of the reasons why I'll always recommend mainly to shoot quite that extreme of -3 and to +3. You definitely need it here. Some instances you won't, but you don't. Even if you've only got 2 stops of difference, you only need to take that back. You don't need to take back everything basically. If we look at the histogram, you can see that we're clipping the highlights up here, so on the right hand side, and even in camera, if I'd have tried to get the exposure correct, I would not have been able to, because if I'd have gone to the left, underexposed it a little bit, I'd have started to clip the shadows as well. So that HDR file was required in this instance. So first and foremost, when I start my processing, I'll go down here on this right hand side and I'll go to the lens corrections option. And you can do this to do it on import as well, but essentially the main one is this enable profile corrections. You want to tick this now because it'll usually add a little bit of brightness to the image, and you don't want to be doing that to the end. At the end, and then if you do remove chromatic aberrations while you're here, that's good practice as well. And chromatic aberrations are usually like basically around the edges or something. So say around the edge of this hill, there might be like a purple or green fringe to it, and that's chromatic aberration. It varies from lens to lens how bad that is, and Lightroom will do a fairly good job of getting rid of that automatically for you as well. So on this side of we're in the develop module at the moment. On this side, we've got where it says basic here, we've got all our tools from down here, and all of these tools are global adjustments. So you make a change in any of these tools from there to there, it'll change the whole image essentially. Whereas these tools up here, these are more local adjustments to an extent, apart from obviously stuff like the crop tool. But yeah, generally speaking, most of that is all local adjustments. So that's important just because obviously we need to make sure, like say we change the hue of the greens, for example, that on the global scale, it wouldn't just change it in this section, it would change it here, maybe down here as well. So it's just something to think about as well. So I'm going to start off by balancing the exposure. And most of these developed tools, I will almost go from top to bottom. They're laid out in such a way that it makes sense to. But generally speaking, I will go to the tone curve first. And what I'm going to do with the tone curve is create a gentle S curve. And that's just going to help expand the tonality of the image. So I usually go up here. So that brings the whites up. And then down here, which brings the blacks down. And if we look at the histogram, so before there and then after there, so you can just see the histogram spread out a little bit more. Some people will go out with a more aggressive tone curve, so they go for real, like a properly shaped S, but I just go for a nice gentle one, but that's just my personal preference. And now I'm just going to start working on some of the other parts of the exposure. So I'll pull the highlights down, and we can see how much detail we've already brought back in the sky just by pulling the highlights down. I would not have got that amount of detail from a single exposure. Pull the shadows up. When I'm pulling the shadows up, I'm generally looking at the darkest part. So this little bit near the road here is the darkest part. So I'm going to pull the shadows up here. You don't want to pull the shadows up too much, but just so I can start seeing detail in it. So something around there. And then I'm going to look at whites and blacks next. So I'm going to set a white point usually and a black point. And that's where the whites become pure white at that point, and then blacks become pure black. So I generally do this you holding Option and then doing it manually, or Alt if you're on Windows. So I'll press Option or Alt, click the node, and usually whites go up. So you see that yellow bit on the left there, where it's yellow, that's pure white. So I'm just going to bring that back to the point where I can only just start to see that. So there we go. So that's the white point set, and set the black point as well. So blacks usually come down, and they're in that bottom right hand corner here. So we can see just from those few changes, we've already got the histogram where we're potentially just clipping a tiny bit here, which will be this bright sun bit here, but overall the histogram's pretty good now. We can sort this little bit out with a graduated filter later as well. So now I've got a balanced exposure for the most part. Let's have a look before. So that was before, and that was after. So what I would say with HDR files, you do have to pull the files back and forth quite a bit more than you would if you was using a graduated filter. But for reasons I've probably explained before, I much prefer bracketing, so I don't mind putting those highlights down to that -100 to get that detail I need back. That's not a problem at all. So next we're going to look at white balance. So when our camera takes a picture, it tries to guess the white balance. Our eyes automatically adjust for it, or our brains do, whereas a camera doesn't have that luxury. So it may be spot on, or it may be slightly off, but generally, so white balance can either be too cool or too warm, and we're looking for something neutral, unless it's intentional. So I'm just going to try and set a neutral white balance with this. So I usually do this by eye on the sliders, so I'm bearing in mind that this is sunrise, so it is quite golden, so there might be an orange tinge anyway. So that's a little bit too blue there. I'm just going to bring it up to about there, I think, and I think that's an acceptable white balance. At 4200, that's still quite cool, given daylight's around 5500. So that's still quite a cool white balance, but I think that looks okay. You can use Lightroom's presets if you wanted to there, or you could even use the pen dropper tool. Generally with a pen dropper tool or eyedropper tool, you would select somewhere mid-grey, because that's what white balance works off. So somewhere in the clouds would usually be a good reference point. Or if you can't find something like in this image where there's not much grey, if you can align the RGB values, you can see there. So that first one's 93. If you could get the G and the B around 93 as well, that might be a good place to reference from. But I generally just set by eye these days. I find it much easier and quicker. If you've got an image with water in your shot, you can set it off to water. There's usually a pure white in there. There should be no cool tinge or warm tinge to that water, by the time that you've done it, it should be pure white. So that's a little tip for you, but we've not got that luxury in this, so I'm going by eye on this as much as possible. And then we just got to look at the tint. The tint could either be too green or too purple. Let's just try and get it to a neutral point as well. So I reckon about there. And I may adjust this later on and I might come back to it, but let's have a look. So that was a shot, which I think you can agree now, looking in retrospect, it was very green before and potentially a little bit cool. Whereas now I think that's a lot more neutral. And sometimes going back and forth as well gives you a good idea of whether you've gone too far on your white balance. Mine might be slightly too purple at the moment, but so just pull that down a couple of points. Let's go back and forth again. So green, I think that's more acceptable. Yeah, just that. Some it might be imperceptible, but that's just a slight change, and I think that's almost there. We'll do a bit more work on the image and we might come back to that at the end. Some of these next ones, I'll just do roughly the same on most of my images. It's part of my style. Sometimes the effects of what you do are very subtle, but I think overall it builds that style. So I'll add a bit of contrast. Don't go too much on the contrast like that. So I'd usually go with around about +20. And then I'll add about +10 texture. In fact, I'll just do this with the keyboard. There we go. And +10 clarity. That's just generally, like I say, just something that I do commonly on the images. If you go too high on any of these, then you can get really weird effects. So less is more with some of these sliders, it really is. Dehaze is something I don't use too often, but if I do, again, you've got to have a soft touch with that. When it comes to vibrance and saturation, I'll add vibrance. Generally don't add any saturation. Saturation's usually handled with contrast, tone curves, blacks, whites, etc. All that enhances the saturation. The vibrance will just simply lift up the more subtle colours for you. So again, about +15 on that one. So one of the ones that I do tend to use on a lot of my photos is the HSL tab. So that's hue, saturation and luminance. Each camera has its own bias towards colours. Mine, I think, overemphasises the yellows a little bit too much. Other brands will emphasise other colours and how they deal with colour science. So sometimes it's about colour correction, but you can also use it for instances where you want to potentially, I don't know, boost the saturation of a colour, which think of something like the purple heather. You might want to just boost the purple channel basically just to bring it to something that you remembered. So on this image, I think the sun over on the left hand side here is a little bit too yellow, and my eye is getting taken over towards this left hand side rather than looking at the rest of the image. So I'm going to bring the hue of the yellow down to more towards an orange to try and balance the scene. So if I just bring this slide down, just watch that sun as I bring it down. Yeah, you can see that it's taking that tinge out. So I'm going to leave it about there. So here's a before, here's an after. Again, very subtle. Some of you might not have noticed that. Some people might struggle to see the difference, but for me, it is a big difference. And I think sometimes these small changes can overall make a big difference to the image. I'll just show you roughly as well. Like I could take the saturation. This road's quite blue, and I could pick this eyedropper tool up, just click on the road, and I can really boost saturation there. Notice as I do that though, the top of the hill above the road has also got some blue tinge in it, so that's adjusting saturation there, which is what I'm saying about this is a global adjustment, so you have to be careful. But I'll leave that as it was. So I'm just changing the hue on this image, that's all I want to change. Next, so you've got the detail tab here with sharpening. I leave this on default most of the time. Just check the image is sharp, which it is. So I'm happy with that. I don't need to do anything. And if I did need to do sharpening, I might do it in an external program such as Topaz Sharpening. But this can do some basic adjustments as well. Again, denoise, don't need to do anything because I've shot it at ISO 100. Lightroom's now got a function where you can do denoise automatically. It doesn't work on DNG files at the moment, which is what I'm working with at the moment, which is why it's got this message. But it would work on the original raw file, where it'll do like a what they call AI analysis of the image and then try and remove the noise for you. If I was doing it manually, if I'm up the luminance, I'll lose detail in that matter, so I'll have to then bring the detail slide up, and you're trying to get that balance between luminance, smoothing, and detail as well. So a way that I usually level my horizons if it's been off in camera is I'll use it in the transform down here, whereas a lot of people will probably use it in the crop tool up here. I find it easier to use it down here. It's just part of the process, it's part of that workflow. And the advantage of this transform as well, if there are any converging verticals or buildings and stuff like that, it will try and straighten them as well. So I find it does the same as up here, but sometimes better if you have got those things. So it's just a process. I'll click auto. It's already leveled anyway, so it's not a problem. So that's the main bulk of the global editing done. Quite quick really. Generally I'd say when I'm editing an image it will take me 2 minutes to go through that stage, and that's it. I can show you before. That's where we've gone from, and that's where we are now. And I can't do it on this image because I'm using a virtual copy, so you'll see the previous edit. But if you wanted to, you could do a before and after by pressing backslash as well, which will show you the before and after of the image. It gives you a good idea. And you can also use like your little references down here. So there you go, that's showing the previous edit anyway. So I can't do it, but that's if you didn't have the previous edit in just your original file, it'd show you basically the image. So I'm just going to do a few local adjustments now. So the first thing I want to tackle, so while we've got a lot of detail back in the sky, we've not quite got enough. So I'm going to start using some of the masks. So this little circle tool node thing here is your masks. You've got some automatic ones. If you've got subjects, it will detect that, sky and background. So the sky one is, I think it is excellent at detecting the sky. I don't tend to use it too much for stuff like this because I feel like sometimes it gives halos around the edges, or it can make the sky look a little bit too stuck on. I much prefer in this instance to use a graduated filter which has a little bit more of a feather, so you don't get that halo or stuck on look. Where I would use something like the sky is if it's a complex scene, or you've got trees protruding the horizon or something like that. It's great for stuff like that. In this instance, I'm going to use a graduated filter though here, a linear gradient. And these linear gradients are pretty much the same as you would get as a physical gradient, except obviously it's virtual. You need the data to be able to use one of these in the image. The advantage of using a virtual one though in Lightroom is that we can then make adjustments to that filter, whereas you can't do that with a physical. So I'm just going to bring this over the sky like that. So anywhere it's red, it's going to affect it. So you can see already it's going to be affecting these hills, so we'll need to deal with that in a minute. But let's just have a bit more of an adjustment. So I'm going to pull the highlights down again and the exposure down, so you can see how much detail I'm getting there. Don't go too much. Let's not make the clouds look unreal. Somewhere about there. And I generally tend to add a little bit of contrast and a little bit of clarity here as well, just to give the clouds a little bit more definition. So what I need to do now though is just deal with where it has darkened these hills. So on your mask you can click, let me just bring this out a little bit, you can click subtract and then brush. So I can then brush over these objects and get rid of them. And what I want to do in this node on this brush, so I've got my size which is quite big, so let me just reduce that size. And then what I want is my flow to be down a little bit, so we usually have it about 70%. So flow is a little bit like opacity. If you have it at 100%, you'll notice this real hard transition where you've brushed it out. So I'll go for a little bit less flow, and then simply I'm just going to erase here, and you can see I'm almost painting the light back in, if that makes sense. And then just up here as well. You can perhaps just go other bits as well where it might have just brushed over. There we go. So that's rough, but this is before. Oh. So that's without the correction, and that's with. So you see dark and then light. And I think that's important because when we're taking this image, this mountain or hill here we're looking at, which is called Cleat, that catches the side light nicely, and it's an important feature. So to darken it doesn't make sense at all. So that's my linear gradient. I don't really need to do any of the other ones, like I don't need to do any brushing or anything. We might look at that in some of the other images, or color range or luminance range. Don't need to look at those. But what I will use is a radial gradient, and I'm going to use a radial gradient to add a vignette to the image as well. And I prefer using a radial gradient over the post-crop vignette tool in Lightroom because we've got more flexibility with it. We can angle this vignette if we want. We can erase some of it if we have to. Like sometimes you'll have an image which is naturally dark, maybe down like in one corner, and you don't want to add that vignette anymore anyway. So drag a large circle out, have a feather to the circle. Click on your node, click invert, and then you've got this basically anywhere red. Again, it's going to darken, so it's going to darken the corners. Now, so you can see if I go extreme what it does, and it's going to help keep your viewer centered in on the image, but I don't want it that extreme. My idea for a vignette is that you have it subtle, just enough that you can, if showing the before and after, you can see the difference, but as a viewer you probably won't even notice it's there. So usually about -0.7 is my sort of go-to, so something like that. It's a bit more on this image. So let's see, let's turn that off. Let's see before vignette, and then with vignette, and you can see it just darkens the corners and it helps keep our viewer focused in on the center here. So that's the two main filters I'd add to this image. And the last one I'd do is I would do the healing brush. So just any dust spots. So we've got a dust spot up here, which we can see, which we need to clone out. And I've just noticed the image is, for some reason, he's cropping there. It might have not filled in the edges on the merge. So let's just pull that in a tiny bit as well. What I think about it. So it looks like that crop's actually dealt with that dust spot as well. Okay, so let me just undo that. Let me bring that dust spot back up just so you can see what tool I'm using here. So on the dust spot removal tool, you can click visualize spots. It'll show dust spots like that. It'll highlight them. So you could just simply click and clone. Another tool I would also use, because with the visualize spots, for example, we can see this one, but there is another one we can't see. I'll show you in a minute. Other thing I'd do is I'd take dehaze up to 100, and it will also highlight it. And sometimes you have to use a mixture of the two. One method will catch some dust spots, another method will catch the others. So just clicking on that, that's going to clone it out. So let me show you this other dust spot. So you can see another one here. If I remove the dehaze, you really struggle to see that, but you can guarantee if you printed this up to a massive wall piece, then you would notice it. If I click visualize spots, I still can't see it, so that's where that dehaze has caught that one. So I'm going to bring that up again. This one's a little bit more complicated because it's on the horizon with multiple textures, so sometimes I might have to do it a couple of times, or sometimes take it into Photoshop. Let's see what that looks like. Not too bad. I'll give it another go or two. I might sometimes just go over quite big. Yeah. Now that needs a bit of work. I'll perhaps do this one in Photoshop. I'll have one more go. Just try a different sample each time. got a bit of a dot in it. I'm not really too happy with it, so that'll be one for Photoshop, I think. Just clone it out in there. So I think I'm just going to add a tiny bit of plus exposure to counter that vignette a little bit. And I think I'm fairly happy with that image there. And we just press L for Lightbox just to see it like that. It gives you a good idea of what the image looks like in a neutral setting. Even though all the Lightroom boxes are grey and shouldn't affect your perception of white balance, they still can. So this is a good idea for checking the image. You can also press F for full screen, which I'm not a fan of because it is a little bit slower. Like I say, you could use these references to see where you've come and gone from before as well. But I think generally, looking into it now, I'm quite happy with that. I would definitely, in my opinion, I would give it 24 hours. I'd sleep on this image now, give it 24 hours, come back to it and check I'm still happy with the edit afterwards as well. If I make major changes, maybe I need to leave it again. If I make subtle changes, then I'm probably good to go at that. Okay, so we'll go on to the next shot. So this is from Loch Fadder on Sky as well. This is the Old Manor store up here. We had a beautiful morning again. Very calm, very reflective. But I thought I'd choose this image because it's not an image where you've got this glorious golden light coming in either. This is a single image, didn't need to do a bracketed image. You can see the histogram's fine. So I thought it'd be interesting to see how I'd edit this when, you know, there isn't the light, but I still think it's a nice enough image. As you can see, I've got a few dust spots on the camera at this point as well. That's the beauty of a mirrorless camera. So just thinking about other things as well when we was here, just composition, just to talk about it really. We spent quite a time here. These boats were drifting and moving about, and it was a case of waiting for the boats to be in the right place. These were both then straight on to us. Quite often we'd have one pointing one way, one pointing the other. It didn't look quite right. And just position themselves correctly, so like the top of the Old Manor store and the reflection here wasn't overlapping the boat, etc. So just simple things like that to be thinking about when you're taking the actual image as well. So again, I'm just going to go through the same process. So it's already got my profile corrections. Click remove chromatic aberration. Let's do a bit on that tone curve. So I'm bringing the brightness up here, and then down. You can see already it's adding a little bit of contrast and a bit more depth to that image. Highlights down, pull that sky, shadows up. So it's darkened the foreground quite a bit. So let's pull these shadows up quite a bit as well. And let's set this white and black point. So this is quite extreme. So I'm going to set it and then see what it looks like. So I think that's gone a bit too much. So I'm just going to set this one by eye. I think that's better. And blacks as well. So something like that. Again, let's have a look at white balance. Doesn't look too bad at the moment. So a shot, that's my take on that one, just a tiny bit warmer. Look, we're at 7,000 though. Previously, on the previous image, we're at 4,000. So shows you the vast difference you can have. I think the tint was pretty much spot on anyway. Not much difference there. Add a bit of contrast. Getting a bit of texture clarity. Actually, I'm going to take that tint back down a little bit. Looking at the Old Manor store, and it's got a bit of purple in it. And sometimes I'll see those things as I go along, and I'll make those changes as I go along as well. Up a bit of vibrance. And you can see quite quickly how quick I'm working through this image. If you do that yellow channel again, not going to make much difference in this shot, to be honest with you. That's fine. So quite quickly, main change is done. Let's click auto there. Just a quick note, you can do, like I say, in this tool, you can straighten it manually. You can click auto here, or if you've got a horizon where you've got 2 points you can reference from, you draw a ruler between those 2 points, and that'll straighten your horizon as well. So I think let's have a look at doing the sky. Let's try a select sky because we've got a complex horizon there. Let's have a look. So it's not too bad. Can you see though, just here, there's a bit of a halo. So I'm going to scrap that. Let's go for linear. So I might just do this. Let's add a bit of tone curve actually. Let's bring some definition back to these clouds. And let's add some contrast. And that bit of clarity as well. That's cool. I'm just going to do a bit of a subtract from this section. Again, try not to darken all that. Now, I still feel it's a little bit bright in this top right, so I'll go for a second one as well over the top. On this one, I'll simply probably just bring the exposure down a little bit, just to bring that detail back. Let's check that. I might just need pulling out a little bit. Let's bring exposure down a little bit more. Just a bit of an adjustment. Let's bring that up again. Yeah, about there. Okay, so that's most of that done already. Let's add that vignette. Invert that. Let's bring that down. Again, that's going to darken that sky at the top. Look at that top left though. It's probably going a bit too much. So what I might choose to do is subtract brush. Again, just brush this bit out up here. Yeah, I think that's okay. And let's quickly just remove a few of these dust spots. So I can show you again, visualize spots, you can really see them. One there, one there. Let's quickly just attack a couple. We won't waste too much time on this because it's pointless. So that's got rid of those couple there. There's one down here. So if you've ever got reflections, make sure dust spots usually show themselves in the sky. But if you've got reflections, they'll also show themselves there. Just for balance. Look, I can't see these ones with dehaze on very easily down here now. This was a really bad morning, clearly. But it's simply just go through them round. Okay, I'm just going to add a little bit of exposure to balance that thingy. Now, I've just undecided. This boat looks okay. This one looks like it's slightly underexposed, just because it's in shadow. Couple of ways. Let's deal with that. Let's do a select object. So I can click the objects. Let's draw over that. Lightroom has almost got it, and I will need to subtract some. Let's just pull the exposure up on that a little bit. Okay, maybe the shadows as well. And let's just erase with the other bit of a brush. Unintentional there. So that's before and after. Just a subtle change again makes a big difference. That was a really quick edit. Let's show you before. So it was quite flat before. And hopefully we just boosted it to what I kind of remember what we experienced. This one's from Snowdonia. An image that you'd see if you come on one of my Ogwen Valley workshops. Lovely evening I spent here, just while I was wrecking this workshop, just trying to get some new images. So we're looking down this river over towards Penny on Wem, and there's some quite nice light. Again, I'm really pushing the limits of the histogram here, but I didn't need to bracket it, so I know I can get this all out of one image. So let's go quickly through this one again. Remove chromatic, enable profile corrections. Tone curve first. Let's bring this up a little, bring this down. Highlights, you can just see how much detail you get back just even pulling the highlights back in the sky. Put shadows up. It's got some quite deep shadows in this bottom left, so this will come up a little bit. We'll set this white. Point, that looks okay. And setting a black point as well. So next white balance, too cool, too warm. We've got a nice reference point here with this white in the water. That should be pretty white. So I think there, I was just literally looking at that water area there as I was setting that by eye. And here we're coming in at 5,800. So as shot, adjusted myself. The camera's done a pretty good job in this instance. And I think tint's going to be pretty on point as well. Yeah, it is. So yeah, happy with that. But it's always worth going over yourself anyway, because you can see where it's come from and where you're going to. Add a bit of contrast. Again, a bit of texture, a bit of clarity. Do I want to use some dehaze to try and bring out the mouth in this? Let's have a look. Yeah, just a tiny bit, just brings a bit of detail back to that mountain. Vibrance. Let's have a look if I want to bring the yellows down. Yeah, it's just, again, in this little area here, it's taking a bit of the tint out of it as well. So let's just do that there. Now, Lightroom might not get this correct with the auto level. Oh, no, it's fine. Sometimes if scenes like this, it goes a little bit crazy, so just bear that in mind. You might end up doing it by eye. So let's try the sky selection on this one as well. Pull the exposure down. See, I think on this one, it's not done too bad of a job. Potentially a tiny bit of halo in around the edges here. Let's bring the exposure up and let's pull the highlights down. And that's probably all right. What we could do is we could do an add brush for this, just to deal with any of that halo in. I think that counted. I've got a minus exposure there. I think that's okay. So I think that's okay. Let's yeah. Okie doke. Let's add a bit of contrast. Pull the highlights down a bit more as well. Maybe pull the blacks and add a little bit of clarity. Yep, okie doke. That's balanced that sky. Now I'm just wondering this mountain. Let's try brush on it. It's just looking a little bit bright. So let's try this. This is going to be very rough. I would highly recommend you spend more time. Yeah, that's better. Just pulling that down a little bit. And on that brush, what I've done there, let's just neaten it up a little bit so we can do a select minus. Just making sure we're not going over the edges. There we go. So just adding that local adjustment. So that's before it was quite bright. That's just brought that detail back in the hill there. Let's go with that radial again. About there, I think. Let's have a quick look at, so we've got a colour range. So say there was a colour I wanted to adjust only that colour. Say I wanted to go with this green, I click that and you can see the mask just selects that green, and you can adjust, refine it, so you can bring it how much down and spread it out as well. So that's useful for any colours, even like if you've got, say, like a shade of blue in the sky behind the clouds, which is looking a little bit cyany or something like that, you can just select that colour, which is useful. Don't need that in this shot. Let's delete that. Or you can do luminance, which is usually, it's basically the brightness. So let's go for the whites here, which is one. So anything of that luminance, that brightness, is being selected. We can refine, bring it down, bring the whites down as well. So still there's a bit in the sky, but say I wanted to get rid of, I just wanted to select this water, which could be a good thing. Again, on this luminance, we could just do a minus brush. Let's go for a big brush, bigger, and then just delete all that, essentially. Very quick way of selecting just what you want. So let's say with this water, it's a bit bright. Just want to pull the highlights down just that little bit. Or maybe I want to put it up, you know, you've got that option there. So this is what these new masks are really good for. You can make really precise selections really quickly, whereas previously I just wouldn't bother with some of these editing techniques just because it'd take too long to do basic things, basically. So again, I'd probably leave that one there. Quite happy. Very quick edit. And it just shows how quickly you can get to somewhere reasonable. So the final image, again, this is from that mill. This is from near where I live in autumn. Again, single image. We've got a bit of brightness up here, which we might need to deal with because that's taken my eye. But let's just go for a quick edit of this one as well. Again, just like I say, single image. So as much as I talk about bracketed exposures, I don't always do them, but it's always useful to have them. So even putting the highlights down, dealt with some of that brightness in the top part of the image. So there's quite deep shadows in this image again, so just pull these up. Let's set that white. And set this black point. Very little needed there. I forgot my tone curve, let's just do that now quickly as well. Add a bit of contrast. Now the white balance again is looking pretty spot on, but let's just double check. Too blue, you can really see in the water it's too blue, too warm. Let's bring that down. So that's about neutral. That's our shot. So the camera's got it pretty spot on this one. And again, I think tint's going to be there as well. Yep, I'm happy with that. So let's just run through those other quick steps. A bit of texture, a bit of clarity, and a bit of vibrance. That vibrance is just going to lift those autumn leaves up as well. So let's pull yellows down. Again, nothing really going to change in this shot. But let's say I wanted to pull the oranges up a little bit. I'm going to pick an orange leaf. Let's try there. Yeah, and just giving them a little bit of a boost isn't too bad actually. So leave it about there. Again, always sharp. Let's have a, let me just put that tool back. So let's have a look. Is the image sharp? Yep, nice and sharp. I think it was. So I was shooting at ISO 1600 here. It doesn't look too bad actually. But the reason I was having to shoot at ISO 1600 because it was so dark at this point in this little section. Even with just a polarizer on, I was struggling to get anything decent. So I've had to compromise longer shutter speed than I would usually go for, 2.5 seconds. But if I wanted it at half a second, I would have had to go really up into the ISOs there. I would have had to go 6400, 1200, 12,000 maybe. So we could even do a quick denoise. Let's have a look what this happens here. So I'm just going to pull this brick so this way you're going to notice it. before and afterwards, and I think it's smushing the detail a little bit, so let's pull that down. That's better. You could click enhance, it's going to introduce a new file for us. I'm not going to waste our time with that. I'm not going to be using that at all, but that just gives you an idea of what you can do. Transform tool. So I think the waterfall looks slightly off, so let's click auto, but then that's not got it right either. So this is an instance where I think it's going to be, let's do this one by eye. Something like that, possibly. So let's go filters. This might be a good place to try that luminance mask. So let's try range, luminance range. Pick up here, bring the luminance down. So it's selected that, but it has selected a lot because the water's quite bright. So let's erase that. Rest of this image. Okay, and on that luminance mask, just pull the exposure down a little bit. There you go. It's just not taking our eye up there so much now. No need for a graduated filter, but let's add that vignette again. Bring that down. Generally when I add a vignette, I'll add a bit of exposure afterwards just to counter it a little bit as well. Yeah, and I'm pretty happy with that. Again, I've got a little spot there. Let's just get rid of that. I'm pretty happy with that as well. I wonder if we can just get some detail back in this water down here. Yeah, that's better. So quite often, I'll make these changes. I'll just, something might take my eye every now and again. I'll notice something. I'll just make that change as I go along. And just like that water there, I just noticed it, and I thought, we could get a bit more out of it. So it's not quite as distracting. It helps lead us up the image as well, if that makes sense. So overall, that's my approach to processing. Hopefully, it's been useful to you. Like I say, these last three are very quick edits. So I'd probably just go over these again. So now I've looked at this one again in retrospect. Maybe let's pull the exposure down just a tiny bit. And this is why it's worth not just settling on an image and exporting it straight away. Just have a quick look over them again. Make sure you're roughly happy with them. Again, this one might want yet a bit more exposure. And like I say, if this was me now, I've edited these four. Shut the laptop down, go away, come back the next day and make sure I'm still happy with them, because I might make changes again. And I'm like, my general rule is if you make big changes, wait another 24 hours, check them again. If you make small changes, you're probably good to export. You always, once you've posted it to the internet and it's been seen, that's it, it's been seen. You can never delete that. And the second image you post, which is a re-edit, will never have the same impact again. That's the reason why I do this method. And just stuff like tired eyes, or you're too excited, or something like that can really affect your perception of processing. So it's really worth just taking that extra bit of time, I think. And your processing will evolve as you go along as well. You'll probably look back at your images, maybe even from a year ago, and you will wonder what you was doing at that point and what you were thinking. I get that less nowadays, but every now and again it does. It still gets me as well. Yeah, hopefully that's been useful for you. If you've got any questions, just pop a comment below or drop me a message or something like that, and I'll try and help as well. Thank you for that.